We'd like to thank REDinNYC, Herrick for hosting, and also Integra Ledger. I'm going to introduce the CEO of Integra Ledger, which is the blockchain for real estate and legal, Mr. David Fisher.
Thank you. And seconding my thoughts and appreciation of Herrick for hosting this event here. This is a fantastic facility. I give these presentations all over the world, and usually it's kind of a boxy conference room, and this is fantastic. So thank you very much for hosting us. As Corey mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of Integra Ledger, one of the most prominent enterprise blockchains in the world, focused almost exclusively on contracts, legal data, documents, things that are very relevant to the real estate industry. And it just so happens I've spent the bulk of my career in real estate. I was the founder and CEO of a company called Millennium Venture Group, which is one of the largest single-tenant net lease developers of small footprint retail buildings. I did that through the 2000s. So my background is commercial real estate finance. And that's, I think you'll see how that's relevant to my comments as I walk you through how we think about the application of blockchain technology to the real estate industry. So I'm going to start by just giving a quick primer overview of blockchain. This symbol here is one that represents Bitcoin. Probably everyone in the room has heard of Bitcoin. It's really the application, we would say, that made blockchain technology famous. Bitcoin just passed its 10th anniversary just a few weeks ago. Kind of astonishing to think that the cryptocurrency craze that sort of captured the imagination of the world, it's really only about 10 years old. It started with a white paper. I mean, just amazing thing. So this document, this almost theoretical document, proposed this peer-to-peer transaction ecosystem without intermediaries. That's if you stop and think about it, it's a radically different world than we have lived in throughout all of civilization. We rely on governments, we rely on banks, we rely on all manner of institutions to intermediate life in general. I mean, it's getting your driver's license issued by the government or your passport, or anything you do, there's some institution in the middle of it. What Bitcoin proposed was a system where you actually did not have an intermediary in, of all things, financial transactions. And I know that there's been carnage in the crypto markets. Nevertheless, Bitcoin, as of I think this morning, throughout the entire Bitcoin blockchain, had an aggregate worth of about $66 billion. And remember, that started with a white paper. Right? It's not a company like Apple or Microsoft. It was a white paper. At $66 billion, that's higher than the market cap of most companies in the Fortune 500. That's remarkable. While most people are focused on currency, tokens, it's exciting, right? You can write a white paper and make millions or even billions of dollars. I mean, why wouldn't you be excited about that if you're an entrepreneur? What we saw in it was the underlying technology that made that possible, and that technology is blockchain. So on the left side of the screen, you see the world as we know it today, which is different counterparties, and then this sort of amorphous cloud in the middle, which is what I'm using to illustrate an intermediary. When you think about it, like, what is a bank? What is an insurance company? Do you know what's happening? And the answer is no, you don't. You don't know what's going on inside that intermediary, but there's some measure of social trust that you use those institutions, because without that, life would just be too hard, it'd be too complicated to try to transact. I mean, we'd be in a barter system, right? We can't do that. On the right side of the screen is a graphical representation of blockchain. And what that represents is no intermediary, but direct connections, peer-to-peer connections between the various counterparties. So it's just a kind of simplistic graphical contrast between the world of, call it today or yesterday, and the world of what we think will be the future. So as you look at this picture, and this is a real estate blockchain briefing, you probably think that's real estate. In fact, that's pretty valuable real estate. We'd all agree? Yes? I would assert that that is real estate. There may be a building, but what confirms that someone owns it, owns the cash flows, or is involved with it is paper or digital versions of paper. It's contracts, it's title, it's everything but the dirt itself. Like anyone in this room, you may own real estate, you may own a lot of real estate, but you don't take it home with you. It sits there, and you have documents that prove that you have a right to it. And in countries with well-developed legal systems, we trust those land registries, and we trust the transfer of value and contract ecosystems. In many countries where you don't have that developed legal system, ownership of property, ownership of real estate can be a highly corrupt industry, if you think about it. So the real estate industry today, despite the fact that it certainly functions, witness all of Manhattan, where we're currently sitting, it happens in a very messy fashion. Right? So the building is there, the land is there. There are contracts and documents that are in the possession of law firms or banks or insurance companies or various parties. And there's this amorphous cloud of information, if you will. And the information moves in a very chaotic fashion as well. So it goes by email, you might have some document sharing service or a deal room, but again, it's messy, it's chaotic, you use different software, you use different document types. What we saw in the creation of Bitcoin was the proof that you can confirm and trust digital existence, right? And per that slide where I showed Lower Manhattan and then an icon for a document, if Bitcoin proved that from nothing you can confirm and trust the existence and preservation of, in this case, $66 billion of value, how could you potentially apply that same technology to the world's contract ecosystem, to real estate contracts, real estate documents? And so what that looks like, in our view, is using a blockchain represented by those little icons in the middle as a backbone to confirm existence of information. In this case, real estate information. So you have a landlord, you have a tenant, you have an owner, you have an investor, you have an attorney, you have an owner, all these different counterparties that are interacting with each other. And we're using blockchain to do that with integrity across these boundaries. So we go from a cloud, in chaos and risk, to an environment where there's intrinsic trust and integrity in the data. So we go from, again, this cloud of data and documents to what we believe very strongly would be the future of the real estate industry around the world. Again, it's over $200 trillion in assets. It's the largest tangible asset class. And we think this is the future, where you have this little icon of the Empire State Building, but you have all the documents, all the contracts, all the history, all the information related to the ownership, operation, ultimately valuation of that asset, all confirmed using a blockchain backbone for data and data identity. So in conclusion, for this really quickie presentation, we're going to get to a kind of a fun demo to make this real for you. We think if you trust the data, right now we trust people for the most part. It's like we do business with each other. If we want to keep doing business with each other, we probably need to be honest. But that's the enforcement mechanism. If someone does something really bad, then maybe get the authorities involved. But fundamentally, it's social trust. We think in the future it's digital trust. That's going to dramatically lower transaction costs. Much faster transactions. I mean, imagine if you could confirm all the data, all the contracts around an asset. You walk into the bank, and the bank can instantaneously confirm the integrity of all that information. Right? So if you own a shopping center and you have 50 tenants and they all have leases, and you can prove their payment history without having to produce bank statements. You can prove the existence of those leases. That bank can probably refinance that loan in days, if not hours in the future. It's about trust in data. We think less risk, more liquidity, ultimately, that impacts value. And that's why we're here. And that's what's exciting about the real estate industry. That's what's exciting about blockchain, the contract ecosystem of law and real estate. What we're going to do now is walk through some reality around blockchain. So a lot of pushback I get, a lot of questions I get around tokenization of assets. You think about it, tokenizing, which is really turning a real estate asset into slices or shares or partners in a limited partnership context. All tokenization really is doing is adding blockchain trust and integrity to the existence of that fact of ownership. Right? And if you can trust that ownership, which we're calling a token, then it should be easier to transfer it. That's where most of the attention is. That's pretty hard to do right now. I mean, there are edge cases and there's announcements here and there of assets that are being tokenized. But we think in the immediate term, blockchain technology is going to actually just be added into all the existing contracts in the world's contract ecosystem, the world's real estate. It's already happening. So I was hopeful that one executive that has worked very closely with us was going to be here tonight, but he was held up in another meeting. But net documents, large document management system with over 10 billion documents in their repository. I spent a year working to integrate what I've just described into that universe of documents. I mean, that could appear live. That we have 275,000 users, significantly in the legal industry, among others. But those 275,000 users, enterprise users, professional users, could wake up one day, sometime in early 2019, and discover they're using blockchain technology in the context of their documents and contracts. We've also done integrations with Thomson Reuters and their contract templating software. Box.com, people in the room probably have used Box. Microsoft, I think everyone in the room has probably used Microsoft. We've done integrations with Microsoft Word and Microsoft Outlook. The point of this is for all the excitement around cryptocurrency, tokens, that sort of thing, the actual application of blockchain is to create trust. And so the reason tokens exist is trust. The reason Bitcoin exists is trust. And so leveraging that trust architecture, we're building into everything. Lots more on the way, but since we have you here tonight, we're going to actually show you what this can mean to you starting early next year when some of these integrations start to roll out. So for that, I'm going to ask David Berger, the Chief Technology Officer of Integra, to help me with a demo. All right, so while he's doing that, we had passed out a document. It's a safe. It's a type of convertible equity security. This is just an example document, not selling securities.
I got a challenge, David. Not everyone has the same copy of the document. Some of them say $150,000, some of them say $100,000. I will give anyone in the room the contents of my wallet, not that impressive, if they can confirm which is the correct copy. Which is accurate? What is the actual amount? It can't be done.
Hold on one second. What does yours say? So 150,000. What does yours say? What does yours say? No, that's the estimate. So yours says 100. Yours says 150. Now, why would that happen? Error, right? Different version, right? Has anyone ever experienced this when negotiating? Yes. If you think about it, you can't prove that any document in your possession, you can't prove that it's authentic. The only reason the system works is, again, you and I know that we did that transaction and we're happy with it, problems, no issue. But fundamentally, if there were a dispute or some argument, like, how do you know? And you'd actually have to go back if it's ever into the court in a dispute. And you look at emails, and you try to figure out which version was correct. Has anyone ever signed the signature page of a contract, just without the other 100 pages? It's like, here, sign the signature page and send it back. You done that? You see a lot of nodding heads. Think about that. That's social trust, right? That's, we trust each other, so I'll just sign it. And then you trust the other party to add that signature page into the document, right? So what David's going to do here is...
So I've taken a generic form. So as David said, this can be any real estate contracting software from Contract Express to really anything. And I'm going to generate this saved document. I'm going to put in 100,000 and I'm going to hit submit. This is getting generated server side, but it can be routed everywhere. In this case, I routed it toward my email. And this will just take a second. Crazy enough to demo this for real. And you'll notice this is the version with 100,000, but there's something interesting here. We've inserted a QR code. So if I actually download this and open it up in Acrobat, you can see the QR code. We'll get to that in a second, but more interestingly, if I go to File Properties, you'll see that the data that I filled out actually appears within the PDF itself. So the PDF is actually a vehicle to hold the data. So if someone emailed you the document and you weren't sure, you could check the properties, or if your software was set up to read that, your software could actually tell, is this the most recent version? You can go a step further and take the QR code, and for this, I'm going to switch over. I'm going to launch QuickTime so you guys can see my cell phone. Anyone who has an iPhone, if you want to take out the iPhone and find someone who has a copy of the contract with the QR code printed on it, you can do something kind of cool. And I'm going to wire my iPhone to the computer screen. So not everyone realizes that iPhones have QR code readers built into the camera. So just go ahead and launch the camera on your iPhone and point it at the QR code. Like that, and you'll see a little pop-up that asks you to open a web page. And if you open the web page, you'll actually get confirmation of the data.
Right, so let me explain what happened here. So in that little form that David filled out, and that could be in Microsoft Word, it could be in Yardi, it could be in any software you use, any software at all. What's happening is the data that was used to construct that contract is also being confirmed on this third-party blockchain. Right, so the significance is not the QR code. The QR code is a convenience factor for this. And it takes you to a web address that just happens to go check the blockchain, in this case the Integra blockchain, to see, does that QR code exist? Does that document exist? What are some basic terms in that document? And you can see this confirms that's $100,000. So now you're not trusting your attorney, you're not trusting your counterparty. Question?
But you're trusting this piece of software. I don't trust that from a hole in the wall. That's the last mile problem. Why do I trust this software?
Because you write your own software. I mean, you're trusting, it's the data source.
But seriously, this ultimately ends up in a court of law when you dispute it. And the court of law has to say, I trust what this piece of software put it out.
No, that's what's different.
All arguments are ultimately resolved in a court of law.
This is a great question. So
that's why I asked it.
This is the question. This is it. So we're not. So in this case, the data is sitting on your computer, right? So David.
A copy of it.
So David just authored this document, right? When he assuming this would be in a contract workflow of some sort, so you have different parties, again, writing to the ledger. I mean, it's distributed ledger. It's not my database, it's not yours. So we didn't write the document to the ledger. I mean, you still have the document, David still has the document, your attorney still has the document, the other party's attorney has the document. Everyone has a copy of the document. All of them have been hashed, digital fingerprinted. That hash has been written to this third-party ledger. Okay, which, and there's actually a slide that I'll get to in a minute. So we're also the founder of the Global Legal Blockchain Consortium, which is 150 institutions around the world. And so those 150 institutions maintain copies of that ledger. Okay, so when that contract is authored, and you keep possession of the contract, but for key terms potentially that you want confirmed, some proof of existence is written to that ledger, which is potentially hosted by Herrick and Latham & Watkins and White & Case and American Express and AIG and so on and so forth. So now you, still in possession of that document, or a court or someone else, you have that document, you hash it, you check that hash against the third-party reference to see if it matches, and that's proof of authenticity. Now, if you and someone else engage in a fraudulent transaction, there's nothing we can do about that. But if what you want to do is confirm the existence and authenticity as it is of that data, that's what the system does.
You gotta trust that third party.
Yes.
That's the key point.
But it's not the third party. You're trusting the network. Remember that there's no intermediary. That's the difference.
You have to trust American Express and the top law firms and Suffolk Law, et cetera, et cetera. The key is, imagine taking a database or even something like Google Docs that gets shared and taking the same technology that Adobe uses to sign PDFs, because it's exactly the same thing, and protecting the data. So if you take a document, you create a digital fingerprint, and there's a way of doing that so it can't be faked. You can't work backwards, and you put that onto the shared Google Docs or blockchain, call it whatever you want, and you use the Adobe technology, the same technology that everyone accepts that this is signed, and you say the data can get written, and once it's written, it can't get changed. That's I'd be happy to talk offline.
But it's not even Google. I mean, most law firms can't use Google because Google has the data. In this case, we're saying the proof of existence is written to 150 different institutions. That's why it's similar to Bitcoin. With all the nodes, I mean, it's if you try to tamper with one, it's going to disagree with the other 7,000. So we've done this with contract data. So we're using the same principles that are able to preserve cryptocurrency. It's a virtual thing with no bank, no government. Right? So how do you trust that? It's because it's the architecture of it. Distributing that ledger across thousands of parties, we're doing the same thing to confirm the existence and uniqueness of documents. So let's keep going.
Okay, cool. Do you want me to show the second piece?
So that's interesting. I think what we're asserting is that most contract authoring software is going to have these features built in. You may not notice it, but it'll be there. You're going to start to basically fingerprint all the data, all the contracts. That's significant later, years down the road. The question we often get is, well, for the 100,000 plus buildings in Manhattan, all of which have existing contracts, paper and PDFs and Word documents and whatnot, what do you do with that? And believe it or not, there's a solution to that. And for that, I'd like to introduce our other partner for the evening. And this is Laura Fundman-Garden. Yeah, come on up. Who's the co-founder and chief operating officer of a company called Diligent. I'll let you tell us more about what that is. And we're going to show you how Laura's company, working with Integra Blockchain, can take legacy data and add digital identity features to that.
Hi everyone. So what David has shown to us about this evening is the centrality of contracts to this whole question of the blockchain and trust. And of course, most contracts right now are sitting either in boxes in basements or as digital files, and there's lots and lots and lots of it. So the question is, how do you know what is in those contracts, and how do you get the relevant information out of the contracts and into something like the blockchain system? And what we do at Diligent is we're machine learning software for contract review. Is anyone familiar with that category of product? Just raise your hand. Okay, some. Not that many. Okay. So a few years ago, if you had, let's say you had 100 contracts, but this is equally applicable if you had 1,000 or 10,000 or 10 billion. The only way for you to find out the contents of those contracts, let's say you were, let's jump to our, can I go to the next? Oh, perfect. The only way you could find out, for example, you were interested in the radius restrictions. You're a shopping center, you had 100 leases, you were interested in the radius restrictions for certain of your tenants. You could get someone to look through those contracts and literally look through them line by line, or you could try to do something like keyword search your way to the right information. Or perhaps you're looking at, again, you're a shopping center, you've got a tenant coming in that wants exclusive use, they want to be the only business selling certain products. You need to go in and look at all your other tenants for permitted use. What have you committed to your other tenants before you can make a commitment to the new one? And so perhaps you would do this in-house, or you'd go to a law firm and you'd have people very painstakingly look through all those contracts, looking for what you've agreed to find out what actions you can take next. Maybe those people are doing lease abstracts, and they're doing what is probably a very painful job of retyping terms into a summary. But what you can do now, what has become possible, is using a machine learning system to do this, to surface key provisions out of your contracts. So what you'd be able to do is upload your 100 contracts, or 1,000 contracts, or your 10,000 contracts, and see these ones contain those provisions, click on them, and go straight into those contracts. Saving, of course, a huge amount of really laborious, expensive work to get you those answers much faster. So that, in a nutshell, is what we do at Diligent. So machine learning software for contract review, all types of contracts. Specifically, these are the terms we would find in leases. So we find over 80 terms just in leases. And I think we're going to be seeing a demo of how this can be applied to the blockchain.
Great, thank you. So Laura and I were presenting in Park City about a month ago, and we got to talking about how we could use her machine learning platform to surface these key terms. So in the first part of the demo, David actually typed in key provisions, and we blockchain those. But for the second demo, which we're about to do, we use Laura's platform, Diligent, to ingest a lease document, understand it, so instead of having a human being go through it line by line. Her platform goes through it, and as the term implies, learns and improves as it goes, and extracts key data points. And so what we're going to show for you now is this part of the demo is how you can use a machine learning platform to surface the key terms, and then we're skipping a couple steps, but after human confirmation that those are accurate, those get hashed and written in blockchain as well. And so in so doing, we're adding blockchain integrity features to legacy contracts.
Okay, so I started with Law Depot. It's a contract generating website. It's similar to LegalZoom, and generated a 30-year page, so lease for a restaurant. So I just wanted to create a document from a real system, so I wasn't kind of faking it anyway. So here we go. Let me select the lease. So here's the commercial lease agreement. And I'm going to hit submit. At this point, it's sending it to Diligent, the file, and it's picking out a number of those terms. I asked for 6 or so terms in particular to find. And it comes back and returns the rent amount is $1,000. The security deposit was $2,000. Contract date parties. But as Laura said, they have over 80 terms I could have done, or you can train their software to pick out specific terms. You'll notice that the PDF that it returns has the embedded QR code, it has the data embedded in the PDF. So if you sent this PDF onto another piece of software, really any software that understands how the data is embedded, which we'll set as a standard, you can process the data onto the chain.
Again, we're not taking a position on whether or not that's a valid contract. There's no way for us to say that. But if what we're trying to do is take that existing document, which currently exists in anonymity, frankly, in multiple file systems of different companies, law firms, so on and so forth, is we're now adding a unique blockchain-based ID to it. We're adding a digital fingerprint, and we're also explicitly calling out and referencing within the document those computable fields as extracted by Diligent in their machine learning platform. So you think about this, if you're in an office building, you're in a shopping center, as you're trying to create efficiency in the way you're organizing information. So once, just give you some, to stimulate your imagination how this starts to matter. So you take a legacy lease, for example, for a tenant, and you run it through the system. It has an ID, you have the key provisions, and now for every lease payment you get, you make a blockchain record of that references this unique blockchain ID. And as you start to add these unique IDs and references to other uniquely ID documents, you start to develop this whole web of integrity around information. And so now when you go to the bank or your would-be buyer or partners, and you want to confirm all the documents and all the relationships, going beyond just saying, hey, here's the file, here's the zip drive, here's my thumb drive. Now you can say, here's the file, and you can check the existence of every document that's been written to a third-party blockchain, which is distributed across the world's largest legal organizations. So that's the best you're going to do in terms of confirming the legacy, the integrity of that distributed ledger. And again, I'm not taking a position. We're not taking a position on outright fraud, because that can still be perpetrated. But if what you want to do is prove in a time-stamped way, over the period of the last year or 3 years or 5 years, that certain events happened, maintenance was performed. Here's the invoice. Here's the hash of that. Here's the digital thumbprint. I mean, think of that when you now give that file to the would-be buyer, who can check every one of it, check it on this third-party ledger, confirm the integrity, the immutable audit trail, frankly, by a third party. You cannot do that today. And to the extent you do it, it's through just general social trust. It's basically someone hands you the documents and you say, okay, I trust you. Right? You can't fundamentally prove that those are the documents. This goes a huge step towards unscrambling that cloud of information. So moving on, and I think we're going to have some Q&A next. Just to summarize what we're doing, it's really a whole new foundation for the world's contract ecosystem. It's already been built. It's being built into and integrated into software that you know. Many of you in this room may end up using this by next year, not even knowing it, as it gets built into software that you use every day. I mentioned the Global Blockchain Consortium, just to give you a sense of who that is. I mean, it's some of the world's largest law firms, largest companies. So this is not G. David Fisher and Integra had a neat idea. I mean, this is some of the biggest, most trusted institutions in the world, working to stand up this data integrity framework. It's truly worldwide. And that's it. So I think the next thing we want to do here is have a quick kind of panel, take questions. I'd like to invite Morris, the co-chair of the corporate group at Herrick. That's okay. Fine. Okay. Yeah, we have one more panel speaker momentarily.
Well, we had blockchain. Figure out what I said. My digital, whatever on that. Thanks. You know you're going to have a problem with blockchain when you can't figure out how to turn on the microphone. Anyway, thank you all for coming, particularly David and for Laura and the presentations. It was great to hear about this. In the interest of full and fair disclosure, and that should give you a tip as to what I do for a living, I'm a capital markets lawyer. So I'm the guy who, for example, gets those safe documents that you have in front of you and remind clients that you can't put something like that together without dealing with the Securities and Exchange Commission. So that's my corner of the world. I'm not a real estate person. Our firm, as you probably know, is one of the largest real estate firms in New York, and we're certainly well known for that and a lot of other things. So a lot of the work that the folks in my department, the corporate group, do is real estate related. And what I wanted to do is to sort of pick up on some themes that have been talked about here, which it's very interesting and illustrative, but you know, coming at it from I'll sort of designate myself as the Luddite in the room, along with you, sir, raising questions about trust and verification, like Ronald Reagan would say. I would agree with you completely. And so the first question I have is, intrinsic in the whole nature of blockchain is decentralization. It's the notion of, depending upon your perspective, either eliminating the middlemen, whether that's a title company or it could be a law firm or it could be a financial institution, whatever it is, and having kind of peer-to-peer trust established through technology. Or if you wanted to be a little bit more cynical, you change the institutions in which you have trust to the technology as the new kind of temple, you know, that you're entering for worship. I really want to understand how this is going to work though in the context of the regulatory environment, because for example, let's stick with real estate. Title records, for example, title. Okay. The government, and I know the governments are already doing this to some extent through, you know, like forms of identity, but how would it work, for example, would the government be willing to kind of step aside and say, we, the government, are no longer the curators of things like property records. We're going to let the blockchain platform self-police.
Yeah, so the position we've taken on this, and there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of blockchain real estate projects going around the world. I mean, there is a government layer, which is land registry, and there are projects where the government itself is experimenting with putting records on blockchain. So I think Cook County comes to mind, and then nation states like Dubai. So there are jurisdictions around the world where the government itself, you know, is creating a blockchain-based system, you know, to confirm that information. So I think if that answers part of your question, I don't see so in other words, Integra and the GLBC would not take a position on kind of the core baseline land registry. That's still a role for the government. But I think, you know, to the extent that, and Corey, yeah. I mean, Corey Goodshow on my team was over in Israel, working potentially on a project, you know, with property transfer, which currently I believe is done at the post office. It's on paper in some cases. So for the government of Israel or various jurisdictions in the U.S. and elsewhere, to just move that to not even just a normal database, but to, you know, a blockchain system, virtually eliminates the ability for public corruption, you know, for that. So that's
going to be a problem, especially in Cook County. Now, I mean, in seriousness, though, I guess I'll come to the panel. Do you, rephrase it, do you think that the regulatory participants in the real estate market, including those who monitor, for example, UCC filings, those who are concerned about title to property, all of the things that are one of the most fundamental aspects that governments have been doing since, like, before the Magna Carta, are they willing to step aside and say to the blockchain infrastructure, we no longer, as the government, play a role in that? You say
absolutely not.
Cook County is putting it, but then don't you undercut decentralization because now you've got an intermediary or an interloper?
Not necessarily. I mean, the question is, what blockchain do you use? So if ultimately Cook County wants to specify the infrastructure of, the Integra blockchain, for example, but it could be Ethereum, it could be Bitcoin. And if Cook County wants to pass a law, first of all, they have to move all the existing records, over. Right? That's one. So one decision is what blockchain to use, which distributed ledger, which distributed database. That's one choice that government can make. The second choice is to put all the existing information on, and then they can pass a law that says that they won't recognize the legitimacy of any filing unless it's recorded, on that ledger. So I don't see a change in sort of the regulatory regime. I think it's a different technology implementation. I think we're seeing this with the SEC, in securities and that regulation, where they're basically saying that these are still securities and they're still subject to regulation, but provided you're compliant, this may be a more efficient way. So we're seeing this with security tokens, for example, which are supposedly compliant tokens.
I think there's a simpler answer to object to your local traders. You and I are going to agree a priori that when we exchange title, we are going to agree that this piece of software, identified in this fashion, will be the arbiter. We've never dispute about the actual content of that title document. And we're going to have contracts signed between ourselves and saying we will agree that. And then we don't care about the government. And that contract will end up in a court of law if we have a dispute. So we're going to bypass the title. The government title out. We're going to agree a priori, but we're going to settle our dispute. And then presumably the next guy you sell it to will agree the same thing. Same piece of software, using the same blockchain. And by the time you've done that 10,000 times, you got a system.
No,
I think that's the only way it comes.
I'm moderating, I'm not advocating.
Yeah, no, but I think that's the way it comes. It does not come by the government. The government will never change. It'll take too long.
Truer words have never been spoken.
Exactly.
Victoria, and when I introduced Victoria, who was just able to join us, brings a wonderful background in the investment world. From an investor's point of view, an investor in real estate, how do you see blockchain changing how investments are going to get done or the benefits associated with that?
I think we need to lift it up and just understand the I think if we just bring it up a little bit from the specific question to understanding what the blockchain brought to us, right? Mathematically, and I happen to be a geek and a PhD in mathematics, so for me, mathematically, that was a genius behind it. Once it creates the series of zeros and ones, you cannot decrypt it back. At least for now, mathematically, you can't. And so what happens is, I can actually, and I've seen people try to fake the signatures. You cannot fake that long 0 and 1 sort of contract, which is then converted into letters and numbers and so on. But the reality is that that is what this technology does. If you take it as a basic primitive sort of assumption, then from there you can build up. Like think about Ripple, right? All of the banks believe they can begin to use this their services, not because they're so genius, because they trust them, because they like their faces, or they dress nicely, because they fit into the sort of banking system and they have the right people on the board. Is because once you execute that FX contract, you can trace all the way back to the beginning of that contract, who traded it, how much it was worth, and you will have that chain completely not disrupted. Right? That's what the legal issue that you bring up. That's what the legal issue goes away. Right? You can decrypt it. If I sell my house through that blockchain, you can then trace down whom I sold it to, or whoever the people bought it, they can find me. Right? So it creates this reliability, right? And logical sort of structure where the personality goes away, right? So where I've circled back, I'm an investor, right? So we like to invest in anything that is disruptive. So we invested in fintech back in 2014 and made a lot of money. And even though we believed at that time that fintech will be disruptive to banking, today we believe it's additive to the banking system. So everybody benefits. So investing and looking at what technology can do to real estate, you have to look at it on binary. What industries or what particular sort of sectors you would truly disrupt, but for which is going to be completely additive. So the brokers completely disrupted. Right? They cannot charge 6% anymore because they're useless, because we can find all the information and the history of the prices, and their sort of added value goes away. Mortgages, right? The banks are going to struggle because today SoFis of this world have the ability to provide the mortgages to their students, initially people who they issued student loans to, because they now know if they have a job, they have a track record of behavior, you can track it all, so mortgages goes away, right? Distribution of the commercial real estate, now we have companies that sell pieces of the real estate, and you've seen all of that. So there's a lot of opportunities for technology to be additive or disruptive real estate. And a lot of that will be embedded in the blockchain. So forget about the fact that, oh, is blockchain going to think of it is that it's going to be a core system that would allow for simple barter with the contractual agreements that cannot fit. I'm just trying to say that.
I agree. I describe it as a technology of trust. It's transparency, auditability, immutability.
So for me as a mathematician, I keep asking everybody I meet with one question: can this be decrypted? And so far, all the professors, all the PhD, all of the experts, whether they made money in the system or not, tell me that it cannot.
That's why David kept on referring to hashes. Even a quantum, it's generally believable even quantum computers can't break them. So it's not the documents themselves go on, they go into something like Box or net documents. It's only these unbreakable, unfalsifiable zeros and ones that you reference. And the other thing I would say quickly is it's not an all or nothing thing. It's not like there's trust and everyone is trusting. You can use these digital zeros and ones to assign who can be trusted to do what. So the government, you can have the government be involved in a blockchain, and only the government is allowed to do certain things. So they need to, if they write something, you can confirm, yes, they had the authority to do it. So it's not one or the other.
To that end, the regulators, and there's a famous case where IBM worked with Northern Trust to set up a private securities, I guess, some sort of trust accounting system, where the regulator actually had a node in the system. And so the regulator was built into the entire framework of the technology, and that's pretty radical and new. You think about banking, audits of banks. I mean, what happens when the government just designed into the system?
But that raises all kinds of interesting privacy issues. Like if you want the NSA to have the master key to sort of the whole hotel, so to speak. But I think it's a conversation maybe for another time. But sticking with the real estate, I guess I'd like to get a sense from you all, and I don't mean to concentrate on real estate. How do you see blockchain currently working in real estate? Is it working? Is it being rolled out? How's it going thus far?
So, the way I see it from the investment perspective, the title distribution also is already in the work. It's been done. We have a number of companies that are doing documents verification. It's in the works. It's going to happen. What was not happening is sort of the trading of the real estate, because at least with the blockchain, because the Bitcoin or any coins associated with the other Ethereum or blockchain have such enormous volatility that if you wanted to bring international clients to buy something or participate in the US real estate or vice versa, by the time you finish the transaction, there could be 20% sort of volatility in the currency, and that is not included the 2% sort of brokerage fee that is charged typically on exchanges, right? So Coinbase, just using, which is one of the more trusted exchanges, it hasn't been broken, works very closely with the government, got a bunch of regulations, including the trust regulations, so could be custody for the holding. They just issued US dollar coin, which means for every coin that is issued, they're physically going to have hold the US dollar in the bank, which means it becomes literally not the preservation of value not sort of something that you bet and it's going to go up in value or going to down in value, which you've seen Bitcoin certainly exhibited. It is just going to be a vehicle for barter. And I think that is going to be incredibly valuable because so far that whole barter concept hasn't materialized yet because of the volatility market. With this one, somebody in Dubai can easily buy and through this coin without and bypassing the bank. I think that opens up the entire opportunity for more transactions to happen.
Or for corruption. I mean, settlement with foreign cards is a big point, those issues. I mean, I take the haircut if I could.
That's what I was referring to. You take the haircut when you trade the Bitcoin because you pay the exchange the 2% as a retail or institutional will be 25 basis points and trade on Coinbase. I mean, honestly. But and then you lose money through the transfer depends the way. So if the volatility of the coins, and that's why there's a whole series of stable coins, goes away. If the reliability of that coin, in this case, is one-to-one collateralization with US dollar, gives you comfort that whether you take US dollar coin or US dollar, it's at the equivalent because it's in the vault, physically sits in the vault. That creates an entire new opportunity for the transaction, increase the volume of transaction, which all hopefully will benefit.
Just can you make it simple? How do you buy from Dubai only? Just to get a sense using this US dollar in
Today, right, in order for you to purchase the home, you will have to go to your bank and transfer the cash and you have to have somebody available, physically meeting with you, looking at the home. At some point in the future, all of the available transactions, so a lot of them will be available on the websites. There will be also VR is becoming very valuable in real estate, right? You'll be able to put your goggles in and literally walk through your future apartment.
Just to clarify that in this example, so you could buy the house now just by trusting someone that assigns to you. You wire the money and they send you a document saying you own it. The problem is you can't really confirm or trust that document. What blockchain does is it allows you to instantaneously check against a third-party register, whether it's the government that's initiated or some third party, trust that person you're dealing with actually has true ownership, free and clear of that asset, and that's exhibited by the fact that they have the keys, the permission to actually transfer digitally that asset to you, and so it's trust in the system.
So it's the currency. You don't understand what
And then the currency, if he's a seller and he wants US dollars and I'm a buyer and I'm in Ukraine, he doesn't want my currency. If I own the stable currency, not Bitcoin, but stable currency, US dollar coin that is collateralized by US dollars, all I have to do is transfer that to him. He has zero risk of volatility of the US dollar.
where do you buy it?
On the exchange.
It exists.
Well, that's what I mentioned.
There are dozens of stable coins in existence right now.
Some
so-
of them are.
Yeah, again, that's just efficiency and transfer. Or we're gonna jump in.
I'd love to jump in back on the titles. And I think we're at a moment now where it's much more possible than it's ever been to have that title system be on the blockchain, because you've got to go and look at the millions and millions of titles that are in existence now. How do you get key information out of that and into a system like that? And that's going to be with an AI system. You're not going to have people who are manually going in, getting that information and typing it into a database. It's not tenable, it's not practical. Something we're working on actually at Dogen is land titles and getting key information out. We're also working with the government in Canada. So it's very much, I think, when we think about AI, when we think about blockchain, the tendency is to feel that it's very much a future technology and that it's not something that's happening now. And it very much is. We're working with many of the companies that David was showing as part of the on the slide we saw earlier. It's very much happening now, and very soon I think we'll be having a bigger impact.
In If I can add to it, I think the words blockchain and AI can scare people who are in traditional industries. Blockchain is just systematic and reliable way to follow and transfer the documentation. The AI be viewed on something that we see in the movies, versus here it is just being able to logically find the references in a document. AI is just the statistics, right, on the big data. It's not that scary.
Think about, I mean, the best way to exhibit this is to think about title insurance. Why does title insurance exist? Right? Like, what's it solving for? Right? And if you break that down, right, you start to see you're solving for unknowns. You're solving for lack of transparency, lack of trust in data. You're trying to insure against information that you may not possess, right? And so with blockchain, fundamentally you're adding this permanent immutable ledger. Again, someone mentioned there may be laws that are passed that stipulate that if there is not a blockchain reference made to some action related to title, then it doesn't exist. But then to Laura's point, you have all the land title in the world currently in manual fashion. All of it, every inch of planet Earth, is manual documents, either paper or digital. And so to get to this wonderful future where all the information is there, we can trust it, it's transparent, we need massive amounts of AI and machine learning to extract that data to get to just the starting point, for the future of digital integrity.
And it's important to recognize that, and this is not the first time, the internet was another example of this, and there are many others, where the technology is always going to be way ahead of the law. And the law will evolve on this, and it is evolving. In my area, the securities area, for all of the hype associated with coins and tokens, the reality is that the SEC is going back to a 1947 case that all of the securities lawyers learned in law school to analyze whether it is. And unsurprisingly, the SEC said in most cases we think tokens or coins are a security unless they're not, which is the way the SEC tends to look at things. That just assume that it is a security unless and until you can prove, or through multiple layers of court decisions, somebody decides it's not. So that's just an example of how there are going to be a lot of things that are going to be changing in this rapidly changing environment. As the technology changes and the industries change, the law will have to keep up, and it's always usually a step behind, sometimes more.
Well, but going back, I agree with you, going back to titles, going back to the legal issues, we did investments in our agriculture, and we looked at a lot of different global opportunities. And the biggest issue with investing in emerging markets, and we live in a global environment, is that the title issue. In Brazil, a lot of significant investors, both bonds and pension funds, are now cannot prove that or they own that land because the title was taken out, put it back in, and there's more than one title. Whereas in Uruguay, it's only one title, and it holds there, and it's held and safe. So why are we relying on that system and giving billions of dollars to the funds that are raising capital to invest in emerging markets agriculture, and we're not going to rely on the title and the technology that is going to confirm it is unique title? I'd rather bet on that.
That's a great point. And I think as humans, we tend to, the things that we already do, we tend to discount the risks and the processes we already have because we're used to them, and tend to overemphasize risks in new processes that could actually be better.
The we fear change mantra.
Yes.
Being a title insurance, and I love this. But one of the title things that I have, or issues that I have, is the sponsor actually sold the wrong unit to the buyer. So the appraisal, the mortgage, the contract said everything was on the wrong unit. And then 3 years later, when they went to go sell that unit, they discovered they sold the wrong unit. How on this exchange can it be reversed? Can it be reversed between buyer and seller, where they just ship the title back and discover it, and then move the correct title?
You can just write, even though you can't change it, you just write a new record, and it's whatever the last record is. So the state is this person owns it, then this person owns it, then this person owns it. Look at the last record, whoever is the transfer, the last transfer is
And
value.
it transferred right, to, and then working with government agencies at one point, the appropriate paperwork is filed on that job with whatever.
Yeah, so I mean, they're manual. Back to Victoria, what Laura and I are describing is the technology that's currently starting to be deployed. That where the end state is going to be what Victoria describes, which is just frictionless transfer of value, trust in the level of ownership of it. The eventual, I mean, it's quite a nasty word these days, but tokenization. But really, we just think of it as just adding blockchain integrity to existing proof of ownership. Yeah, it's a unique identifier. And so, to your point, I think in a future state, right now, there are so many manual processes to make this happen. But if it's all digital, and you have systems that behind the scenes they're checking this, you just say, yes, I confirm that it's unit 22B that's being sold. And the buyer and seller are independently indicating that's the one that's in question. The chance of actually moving the wrong asset and any sort of manual mistakes is it's not going to disappear, but it's going to be much reduced. It can be corrected, managed.
I'm getting the hook from the corner here, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of other questions. There'll be an opportunity to network outside with the speakers and among yourselves. And so at this point, I would say thank you all for coming. We appreciate it and appreciate the involvement of all the companies and look forward to seeing you next time. Good luck.